My guest this morning, in terms of synchronicities and serendipities, is J. Gary Sparks, who was raised among the rolling hills of southeast Pennsylvania. Well, I was raised in the rolling hills of northeast Maryland, so we're kind of, just across the Mason-Dixon line. Raised within a very practical and grounded environment, and while working on a degree in electrical engineering at Bucknell University, Gary took LSD, discovered God, and knew he had to broaden his horizons. After graduating from Bucknell, Gary traveled to South Korea as a Peace Corps volunteer to teach the teachers there certain Western protocols of science. Well, that reminds me of Operation Crossroads and other people that have been shaped by the Peace Corps experience, like Chris Matthews. Anyway, one day as he observed another class, Gary met a beautiful Korean woman and fell in love. Unfortunately, the woman's husband did not look kindly on their affair, and with a price on his head, I got to follow this story, Gary left Korea, his spirit nearly destroyed. Trying to find meaning in life, Gary immersed himself in theology at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, and during his first year he fortuitously wrote a paper on his view of the world for a Freudian studies professor, and when Gary received the paper back, there was a note from the professor gently asking him if he would like to talk. From promptings by this Freudian studies professor/therapist, Gary began studying the work of Carl Jung and was immediately smitten. In Jung's work, he found the synthesis of his three interests: science, the East, and theology. It took him 8 years of training at C.G. Jung Institute in Zurich, Switzerland, where he was introduced to questions common to psychology, science, Eastern spirituality, and theology in the lively training atmosphere. Preeminent among his Zurich teachers was Marie-Louise von Franz and C.A. Meir, both Jung's close collaborators and both articulate spokespersons for the questions that were occupying Gary and that had similarly occupied Jung at the end of his life. Gary has subsequently maintained a private practice as a certified Jungian analyst for over 35 years. Gary, welcome to the other side of midnight.
Thank you, Richard. It's nice to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
I don't know where to begin. Remember, I'm kind of new at this stuff anyway, and when I'm confronted by a feast as rich as is now in front of us tonight or this morning, it's kind of like, where do I possibly begin? So I guess I should probably begin with where you began, which obviously changed your life because of a friendly professor's kind of nod and tip. Who the heck is Carl Jung, and how did he change your life?
Well, Jung originally started as a student of Sigmund Freud.
Okay.
So we're in Europe around 1900. Everyone's familiar with Freud, and the Jungian approach is somewhat similar in that we look at instincts and needs, and we start really with the person's biology. But Freud was an atheist, and Jung was not. And so he developed a system of psychotherapy, I would like to say, that broadens the view of the human being, that works both with needs and with spirituality, with culture, with history. It's a much broader point. What I liked so much was that Jung knew through some of his previous clients of some of the issues that were emerging in quantum mechanics, and they're parallel to his own work. So I had this education in engineering, and all the things, chemistry, physics, that go along with that, and an interest in theology. And he was a guy that was working with both sides of my personality. So that's how I got hooked.
So Jung is identified with this fascinating term, synchronicity. What the heck is synchronicity? And again, I think we've all experienced something like that, but most of us say, just a coincidence, or we don't even think about it. What made Carl Jung kind of pay close attention to the concept of synchronicities, and what are synchronicities?
Well, let me start off with a very basic definition. A synchronicity would be this is a big word, an acausal. This is not a causal event, an acausal coincidence between an inner, I'll say image, an acausal coincidence between an inner image and an outer event. Let me give you an example.
Gary? I think we lost Gary. I think the whatchamacallit guys are not happy. So I will do this, and then I will do... Isn't it interesting how you get, kind of into the meat of something, and then suddenly, bingo, there goes someone. Okay. I'm trying to remember. He has a very curious Skype address, so it's not obvious. I think it's an I. There we are. Okay. No, there we are. Okay, let's see, folks, if this is going to work. Remember, we can talk to Hong Kong, Tokyo, one ringy-dingy. Oh, it's not. Tell you what, Em, why don't you give me a phone number in the window, and I'll try reaching him on the good old telephone, because obviously somebody does not want us to talk about synchronicities with Gary tonight. So, I see typing. For all those who are not connected on the internet, this is kind of a different way to do radio. In the old days, all you have to do is to basically pull over a telephone, dial it, patch it into the network, and bingo, there you are. In these ultra-sophisticated digital days, we have to actually cross, connect, paste, cut, paste, whatever you think you're doing, and then ultimately, we haven't had to do this in a while. So while M is getting that information for me, let me see if I can connect with him on Skype again, because this is very strange. It was a crystal clear connection, was tested this afternoon, but again, if I start a show by basically saying that someone's out to get us, they're going to demonstrate that they're out to get us, So, okay, it's ringing. It's ringing.
Hello?
Hello, Gary.
I just dropped out or what?
You just disappeared. One minute you're on the radar, and the next minute it says, there is no such individual as Gary Sparks. The person to whom you think you are connected is fictional.
Well, that may be, but I'm here anyway.
Okay, so you were back, and M is getting me
Where did
there.
you lose me?
And we got backup phone numbers now, so, no matter what happens, we will stay connected. Okay. So we were about to get into Jung. Why? Well, what is synchronicity?
Okay. Well, I got to tell you.
Was that an example of what just happened of asynchronicity?
I'm afraid it might have been.
Oh. Okay. Please explain.
Well, let me give you a definition, and then we'll try to figure out what's going on.
Okay.
Did you hear my definition or not?
No, you completely went away into a Mars or Pluto.
This is very weird. I'll tell you some other weird things that have just happened. But let's start at the beginning.
Yes, and folks, do not please call in. Our bandwidth is limited, so hold your questions till another hour or two, please. Go ahead.
Here's a very simple definition. An acausal coincidence between an inner image and an outer event.
Now, when you say an inner image, you mean like an inner dream, an inner idea?
Yeah.
A kind of a projection of a hope, a kind of a longing.
So my phone is ringing with my own number on it.
Yeah, that's what they do around here. I would just disconnect it. Isn't this fun, folks? Boy, there was this old pre-World War II expression. You always know that the flak is going to be heaviest over the target.
Well, let me try to get out a very simple definition before we all go mad.
Before something else happens.
Yes, who knows what. Yes, I was trying to make it... just a second.
Okay. See, this is the benefits of a live radio show. This can't be scripted.
No, this is not scripted. Yeah. And this is synchronicity, I'm sure.
When I used to do stuff on Sidonia in early, like decades ago, I would have weird things like this happen. But after I got to a certain point, that stopped happening because the guys who were behind it realized that all they were doing is calling attention. As Hollywood used to say, hang a lantern on it.
Yeah.
Well, you are definitely now at the top of the list of the guest who's experienced the most weird stuff in the shortest period of time in being introduced that anybody's appeared on the show in the last 8 months. So,
well, I'll take that as a compliment.
Something you're going to say is going to change the future, and somebody doesn't want that.
Well, let's see what it is.
Synchronicity.
Okay. Synchronicity. I'm starting out very simple. An inner image, yes, a dream or a fantasy. But let's stay with a dream because that's a little bit more dramatic. And an outer event. Here's an example. A woman dreams of bear claws. Now, she's at that time was pretty passive and needed to learn to be more aggressive and give people bear swats, okay? That's sort of basic Jung Psychology 101.
Okay.
The next day, she goes to Joann Fabrics. She's standing in line to pay for some fabric, looks over her shoulder, and the woman standing in front of her has a handful of buttons, and on each button is embossed a bear claw. Mm-hmm. That's a synchronicity. The inner image replays itself in the outer world.
Now, is it replaying itself, or is just that we are noticing? I remember when I got my first car, 57 Chevy, how many 57 Chevys I saw on the road suddenly that I hadn't noticed before. So is it attention, is it awareness, or does reality really change? Something in the dream connected so that there was you say a causal, meaning there was no connection.
Yeah, there's no causal.
But I'm asking, is there actually underlying it some kind of connection?
I think there has to be, yes. Let me give you one. I just gave you that as a very simple example. Let me give you one that's a bit more involved. And if our lines stay open, I'll get through it. A woman I was working with dreams of being raped. Gang raped. Now, first thing we do, of course, is we see, was there any abuse in the past? The answer was no. That gang rape became a rape by one man. This occurred over about, maybe 3 or 4 months. The dream slowly evolved. That one man
So it went from a gang down to one person.
One unknown man.
In this woman patient's dream.
Yes. And as I say, there was no objective event. This was purely a subjective image. Mm-hmm. So after about another month, that one man became her first love. And the story came out that when she was 16, she fell in love. Her mother was crazy. Her mother said to her, if you continue that relationship with the boy, I'm going to kill myself. She broke off the relationship. She came in and told me that story. So I said, well, clearly there's something unfinished in that relationship that's persecuting you. We've got to find out what that is. So she said, well, I'm going to go back to my old neighborhood. She was raised in the inner city, Indianapolis. I'm going to go back to my old neighborhood and see if anyone knows where this guy is. So she went back to town and asked around. Nobody had seen him, heard from him since high school. And that she was 40 years old at the time, so that would have been, 24 years ago. Mm-hmm. So she came in and said, I looked around, I don't know where he is. Well, using the logic we've just seen in these earlier dreams, I said, don't worry about it. We've seen the dreams evolve. In time, that guy will let us know what the conflict inside you is around him. Does that make sense so far?
Were you thinking he might actually show up?
Well,
science is nothing if it's not prediction.
She came in the next week, white as a ghost. After 24 years, he called her from the West Coast. And all he said was, we have some things to talk about. He came to town, they talked. They were both married and, relatively happily married. It wasn't a marriage issue. And what she realized was that she had always admired him for his intelligence and discipline. She herself was quite intelligent, never had the opportunity to go to college, given her modest circumstance in childhood, and enrolled in university, got her degree, and the dream stopped. So that is the kind of thing that struck Jung. Dreams can either replay what's going on inside of us. Synchronicities can either replay what's going on inside of us, or they can actually move the dream forward.
Fascinating.
That's a synchronicity.
Hold it there. We're at the bottom of the hour. My guest this morning is Gary Sparks, 35 years as a Jungian psychologist, as an analyst, and the places we're going to go when we come back. You're on the other side of midnight, in a very interesting night where folks out there are playing fun and games, getting a little more brazen, but then that's what the physics is calling for, isn't it? We're going to get into that as well. Yes, you're on the other side of midnight. My name is Richard C. Hoagland, and we shall return. And we are back on the other side of midnight in the beautiful land of enchantment. 40 degrees out there, Patrick. I would put your Snuggies on because there's cooler weather heading in your direction. Now, before we get back to Gary, I would like to thank Laura London, who actually arranged this interesting conversation this morning. So, Gary, you were giving us some examples of synchronicities. What kind of synchronicities in your life moved you in this direction from a very tragic situation, as I read at the opening?
Well, at that time, I really wasn't aware of this dynamic. But I can give you
hang on. But didn't it happen even if you weren't aware, and then you look back and you say, oh, my God, look at that. I mean, I would think this major incident in your life that turned it is kind of a synchronicity.
Well, in retrospect, yes. Certainly in retrospect. But, I wasn't paying attention then. And if you don't see these things, consciousness can't engage with the meaning of the event and nothing happens.
Okay. Now, have you noticed that there's a pattern in people's lives where if the knock on the door is ignored, the next knock is louder, then
yes.
Then the window breaks, then the house bursts into fire, and
without a doubt.
Until someone is okay. So, kind of describe that pattern, because most of us go through lives kind of stumbling along, trying to, tripping over the truth and picking ourselves up and making sure that it didn't disturb where we were going. Well,
just a quick aside about knocks on the door and internet going down and phones going down.
Mm-hmm.
About a year ago, a guy called me up and wanted to have an appointment. I had kind of a funny feeling, but I said, okay. The guy came for his appointment. The moment he knocked on the door, my house lost all power.
Oh.
He came in. I realized he was a very difficult, potentially dangerous person, and managed to basically say this wasn't the way to go.
In your work, do you deal with unusual energies? Do you refer to? Are you up on the idea that people can actually do more than just be human?
Oh, sure, definitely.
Okay.
Well, without a doubt.
So your antenna were jangling because this guy didn't vibe correctly.
Well, it's just freaky to have somebody knock and all the power in your house goes out.
That's a wake-up call.
Yeah. But I think your question is, going back to your original question about do these things knock harder? Definitely, yes.
The more we resist, the more we don't pay attention.
The more we, and now this is going to sound a bit elitist, but it's really actually as painful as it is beautiful. I don't think everyone has the same drive to create. And those with a strong drive to create don't seem to be able to get away with ignoring the knocks.
Oh. So it's kind of drifting through life as the comfortable but oblivious whatever.
Happy carrot.
Versus being passionately driven to do something,
yeah,
but you don't know what.
Yeah. And I'll give you an example in my own case. We'll be maybe talking about Wolfgang Pauli here a little bit. I've been very interested in his dreams. That's another whole story. But I spent a lot of time trying to read up on the literature about him in German. My German is not that good, and it was a real pain. I'd get up a couple hours early every morning just to prepare that stuff. And I was asking myself, am I just wasting my time here? Can anything ever come of this? And I had a dream that I would be getting the work I would be focusing on for the rest of my life. That was the dream, very short. The next day...
That should get your attention.
In the next day in the mail, I get a packet of all of Pauli's letters to Marie-Louise von Franz, in which he discusses his inner life, his personal struggles, and his spiritual vision.
Well, that's definitely confirmation of a theory.
Exactly. A colleague of mine, I mentioned his book, David Lindorf, who is sadly now deceased, had gone to Zurich and had searched all the archives at the Federal Polytechnical Institute. They call it the ETH in Switzerland. And CERN, I'm sure you know about CERN. Pauli's papers were spread out between those two places and collected all this material and was then diagnosed with cancer. And knowing he didn't have long to live, sent me all the papers. But the dream forecasted that.
My gosh, you obviously are tuned in. Okay, I think we have in Radio with Pictures, we have a 3.5-minute video. Do you want to kind of take us through that?
Yeah, that's...
Is that link number 9? It says Produce 3?
Yeah, number 9.
Number 9, okay.
So
for everybody... let you get to a computer or in front of the computer. Folks, go to our homepage, which is othersideofmidnight.com. Upper right-hand corner, click on Radio with Pictures. That takes you to tonight's guest page. You scroll down past my links and Gary's links to number 9, and we'll see if we can bring it up here. This is an interview with Maria, right?
Marie-Louise von Franz, yeah. Okay. She was very close to Pauli and Jung, both.
Okay, so let's see if we can bring this up.
Is there any connection between alchemy and what you wrote in Number and Time?
Yes. Seen from our modern standpoint, the alchemists projected a great deal of what we today call the unconscious into matter. From the 17th century onwards, the whole development was towards treating matter more and more objectively, as a thing unto itself, how it reacts and what it is, and away from all these psychological projections. But what remains unsolved, even to our day, is the relationship between psyche and matter. Today we have such fashionable themes as mind and matter, mind over matter, mind under matter, and the whole problem of how man's inner psychic life, including his consciousness and unconscious, relate to matter, to physiological processes, and finally to the atomic and subatomic processes in general. This today is the great, exciting and much discussed theme, and one can see it as modern alchemy. Jung had at first pushed this theme aside. He said, "I focus my attention on the soul. I observe psychic processes and leave the question of how they relate to matter and to the processes of the brain open. I make no judgment." But towards the end of his life, he was struck more and more by the fact that atomic physics and what he had discovered about the collective unconscious both brought about remarkably similar conceptual changes, something one could not ignore. It seems as if when the psychologist bores through the psyche and comes to its deepest point, he comes into contact with matter. And when the physicist bores through matter and comes to the deepest point, he comes into contact with his own soul. This is where the sciences meet. That is the breaking through of a tunnel. Like in a tunnel, one digs from both sides, and now we are at the threshold of an exciting breakthrough. One of Jung's pioneer concepts is the idea of psychoids, that archetypes are also capable of partially influencing material processes. And this is naturally where modern research must carry on. Here there's still an awful lot to do. And it was because of synchronistic phenomena that he was forced to accept the idea of psychoids, the view that archetypes become manifest in matter.
Diese merkwürdige Tatsache, dass wenn das Unbewusste eines Menschen stark erregt ist.
It is a strange fact that when a person's unconscious is strongly stimulated, with the result that the archetypal level is stirred up, the physicists call this being in an excited state, then very often synchronistic events take place. Miracles, in quotation marks, take place which are meaningfully connected with inner events. The most common phenomenon is when one has a vision or a dream and sees it played out in the outside world on the following day. Something takes place which corresponds to this vision in a meaningful way.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Gary,
is there any connection between alchemy and what you wrote in...
There. Okay. Would you say that Jung was the first modern psychologist or first psychologist ever to basically go to the heart of the matter, which is how does physics, the physics of materiality, the physics of 3D reality around us, how does that intersect with this phenomenon called consciousness?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That, for me, that's that's an idea he came to late, but for me, it's one of his most valuable contributions, and it's where he hoped, as she said in the video, or implied, that his work would be taken in the future.
Well, we've been dabbling and looking and speculating and making measurements in something called hyperdimensional physics and torsion field physics, which are kind of related. And it was from that, kind of separate empirical measurements that I discovered that human consciousness can, in fact, influence matter in very striking ways, provided the matter is in the right context, in the right situation environmentally, so that there's an amplification of whatever connection is going on. So it's fascinating that Jung, decades and decades and decades ago, was kind of looking at physics as, how does matter wind up appreciating that it's matter? And that, of course, takes us to Wolfgang Pauli.
You're right on the button, Richard. This is exactly the questions that Pauli and Jung.
If you can get a little closer to your mic, we're getting a little bit of an echo.
This is the area that Jung and Pauli worked on really assiduously. Let me give you a quick background about Pauli and Jung.
Absolutely.
Set the context. As you know, I'm sure Pauli was part of the quantum physics committee, or whatever you want to call it, group in Copenhagen. And that was finished, I think, around 1928, when they pretty much had the Copenhagen interpretation finalized. Mm-hmm. He was then offered the chair of physics at the University of Zurich. Actually, it's called the Eidgenössische Technische Hochschule. It's the like the MIT of Zurich.
Okay.
And he took the chair that Einstein had once had. Immediately fell into a wild nightlife, drinking, probably prostitutes, dissolute, ended up getting in bar fights, and as you can imagine, a university would not tolerate that, and he had to get into therapy, so he ended up in Jung's consulting room for that reason.
This was young Wolfgang Pauli, the brilliant physicist who changed modern physics.
Yep, same guy. So he was
a troubled teenager.
Well, he would have been, about 28 at the time.
Arrested Development, troubled teenager.
I don't know. People who knew him said he was more the genius than Einstein. I think a man with terrific intellect and a brilliancy that drove him to God knows what.
Well, people like that tend not to be extroverts, so there's a
Yeah.
real conflict there, and you're
Yep.
the psychologist, so
Yep.
it's probably not unexpected that he would have these terrible, it's like boundary turbulence. You can't go through life.
He was a turbulent character.
Yeah. Okay. So move on.
So
where do we get the intersection of him and Jung? Did he actually get Jung as his therapist?
Yes, he started off.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, he went to Jung. Jung referred him out rather quickly to a woman, saying, "What you really need to do, Pauli, is work this out with a woman." So the bulk of that first therapy was with a woman. Her name's Erna Rosenbaum. It's not a name anyone's familiar with. And he got his feet back on the ground. And then Jung and Pauli could maintain what I would call a professional friendship. That continued until World War II broke out. Pauli, being half Jewish, had to get out of Switzerland. He was Austrian. He was half Jewish. If the Nazis had come in, he'd have been a goner. So he went to the Institute for Advanced Studies with Einstein. And he was the only physicist who did not work on the Manhattan Project. Oppenheimer, as you probably know, was the head of the Manhattan Project. And he was one of Pauli's students. But Pauli himself refused to take part.
Now, was this because of principle or because...
Yeah, he felt it wasn't science's job to kill people.
Oh. And he knew what the bomb would ultimately do.
Sure. Yeah, he refused. When the bomb did go off, even though he did not take part in their construction, he got horrifically depressed and went back to Switzerland and went back to Jung. And that's when it really gets interesting. He had about 50 dreams that have been recorded and published. And what he said to himself is, where have we gone wrong? How is it, my beloved? Those guys were just playing beer pong in Copenhagen. And all of a sudden, from that work, hundreds of thousands of people were killed. And that distressed Pauli. So he went to talk to Jung, and Jung said, let's watch your dreams and put the question to your dream maker, what has gone wrong?
Interesting.
And so Pauli's dreams, last 50 dreams before his death, are a response to the human capacity for mass destruction and science's role in it. Well, getting to synchronicity now, Pauli knew synchronicity was a reality. Jung was very shy to publish on it because, he got tired of being called a mystic and a woolly-headed old man. But Pauli said, look, you got to publish on this stuff. So it was really at with Pauli's support that Jung published on synchronicity. And the very questions you raised, Richard, are what occupied their dialogue. The last 15 years of Pauli's life, they'd meet for a beer or for lunch, or Pauli would be invited over to Jung's house for dinner, or they would. Jung had a sort of a summer home down the lake of Zurich in a little town called Balligen. They would just get together and talk informally. And the questions that Jung had is just what you asked. What is the nature of the human personality that it can connect with matter? And vice versa. On Pauli's side, who was a true scientist, you might want to talk about what a true scientist is, who was a true scientist, asked the question, what's the nature of matter that the psychological processes in an individual can affect it? So each from their own discipline asked the same question, but from a different perspective.
But think of the synchronicity that brought these two geniuses at that time together.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Their very existence together, trying to figure out the problem, is the quintessence of synchronicities in the largest possible context.
And I think they knew that. I think they knew they had a destiny together.
Fascinating.
I think Pauli's. I love Jungian psychology, but I would have to say, apart from the Red Book, which is Jung's sort of inner journey, Pauli's dreams are the most important document of the soul of the 20th century.
Okay, so in terms of Pauli's dream, remember, Pauli's the guy who created something called the Pauli exclusion principle.
Right.
which basically says that no two forms of matter can occupy the same energy state simultaneously, because that's reserved to the one who got there first.
Right.
And that's why it's excluded. It's a fundamental concept of exclusion, which leads you to resonance, which leads you to connection, which leads you to synchronicities.
Yep. The non-determinatively causal dimension of the atom is what held those two guys together. Pauli knew causality can't explain it all, and synchronicities aren't causal. And so Jung...
Well, they're not causal in this three-dimensional reality.
Right.
Were they looking for higher dimensional causality that would then be reflected in what we appear to be a cause and effect situation, and in fact is a lot more interesting?
Well, by the time they got the questions formulated, they both died.
Another weird synchronicity.
Yeah, I mean, they did what they could. They didn't explain it, but what I think so important is they articulated the question.
And the right question is everything. Okay, so let's not get ahead of ourselves, or as the phrase goes now, the one that's going around, getting out on our skis. How do we relate Hiroshima to Pauli's dreams, and how did Jung follow that trail, and what was his conclusion?
Well, there were about 50 dreams, and I would just try to give you a very brief summary of what appeared in Pauli's dreams.
Okay.
I think three main images. One, the image of time.
Like time is getting short, time is running out, time is really...
No, that the West had lost the Greek grasp that there is a qualitative dimension to time, which the Greeks called kairos. See, a synchronicity is a different moment of time.
Okay. Sounds a little like Kozyrev. He's the great Russian torsion field physicist who basically called his theory not torsion field physics, but a theory of time. So time is at the heart of this physics from Kozyrev's perspectives, from Jung's perspectives, and from Pauli's perspectives.
Yeah. And so you see what Pauli realized. I mean, Pauli really took his dream seriously. And he realized that the scientific method that he had developed had no way of explaining the qualitative dimension of time. So he then realized that's where physics has to go.
Well, you've heard that old Einstein relativity joke, right?
No.
An hour spent sitting on a hot stove is an eternity, and an hour spent waiting for your girlfriend is an instant.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, that kind of captures that time does have a qualitative dimension to it. Well, that's one of the images.
Okay.
The other image is a dream figure he called the stranger. Now it gets a little complicated.
Well, we have to get back to his fundamental invention, which was the concept of an archetype. That we are individuals, but we somehow seem to have the same icons in our downloaded consciousness app. So we have these archetype things floating around, and that's how analysis try to get into our heads, because they assume that the icons, the archetypes, represent the same stuff person to person to person. Right or wrong?
Oh, you're exactly following my thought process.
Okay.
The next figure is one he called the stranger.
Which is an archetype.
Well, he felt that science was based on archetypal factors.
Okay.
Let me try to explain that. We normally think that the scientific method proposes a hypothesis and then verifies it. But his question was, where does that hypothesis come from in the first place? It comes from the structure of the human being. The structure of the human being is what an archetype is. And it's also a structure in matter. And it's the convergence of those two archetypal factors that allows scientific creativity to evolve.
All right.
Now, that is not an accepted view in the scientific paradigm. And so Pauli dreamt that this figure he called the stranger, who he said represented the archetypal background of science, was seeking admission at the university where he was teaching. And he was universally rejected. So he realized here is another frontier for science to explore, its archetypal background. The third image that appeared in his dreams was an image from Gnosticism called Sophia. Are you familiar with Gnosticism?
I was going to say, I think we better define Gnosticism for folks. Certainly for me.
The Gnostics, or Gnosticism, was a competing understanding of what happened around the birth of Christ, which was subsequently branded a heresy. What we now call Christianity is something formed by groups of committees that decided what narratives were acceptable and what narratives were not acceptable, because within the first 100 years, the descriptions about what really happened then were so varied as to be contradictory. Well, one of those competing narratives is called Gnosticism. And the big thing about Gnosticism is the Gnostics thought that at the creation of the world, God got trapped in matter. And so in their mind, what Jesus Christ did was come to the earth to release the pieces of God caught in matter and return them to God. Well, as a metaphor, that could very well represent the life in matter that you just referred to earlier, which we see evidenced in the synchronicity. I mean, that's a mythological...
I am having this incredible moment of deja vu. Another term to add tonight. I'm seeing that Salvador Pauli painting of Christ on a tesseract.
Yes.
Which is the quintessence of God trapped in matter in the hyperdimensional model.
Yeah. Well, you find that in Impressionism, where the material world is depicted as alive. Now, maybe you could explain to me a little bit about the hyperdimensional aspect.
Okay. Well, it's simply that this reality is part of a cascade of energy information from higher dimensions and kind of gets sorted out down here, and a lot of stuff gets lost, and there are hints and clues and resonances and patterns, which basically is a reflection of the pattern of higher dimensions being imprinted in this reality in ways that are almost at the noise level, but not quite, which is why we get these causal synchronicities that appear not to have a cause, but in fact, if you go up a few dimensions, they have a perfect cause, but you just can't see that part.
Well, that could very well be. That certainly could be. You know, that you have just put in thought what the Gnostics were trying to express in a narrative. Something on high comes down and populates time and space.
Yep. I mean, you could use a kind of a virtual reality computer games thing and say that we're all just, archetypes of a higher level game, and we have these interesting icons that represent each of us, and when the game is over, we return to source and we start a new game.
That sounds good to me.
But we have work to do tonight here, so we can't do that yet. Okay, so synchronicities. I mean, this is basically Jung and Pauli getting together and pattern matching.
Yeah.
And what was their conclusion? That there is an overarching pattern that emerges when the conditions are right, and then what are the right conditions?
I think there are two parts that I need to respond to in that question. One, in the individual most...
I'll tell you what, we are at the top of the hour, so let's hold the response, let people soak up the idea of synchronicities that actually are part of another reality that's kind of bleeding through, where these design factors are not unconscious. They're in fact us trying to get our own attention. Wake up, dummy! Pay attention! You're on the other side of midnight. Yes, waking up in a few hours as dawn breaks over the east. Other side of midnight. My name is Richard C. Hoagland. Our guest this morning is Gary Sparks. We're talking about Jungian synchronicities and a lot more, and we shall return. We are back on the other side of midnight under a gorgeous crescent moon. I mean, the desert under moonlight is magical. Okay, synchronicities. So what is the major challenge for Western science in terms of synchronicities? Because it seems to me it's kind of, as my grandmother used to say, putting the cat among the pigeons.
I don't know what that means.
Think of a whole bunch of pigeons, then turn loose a cat, and what happens to the pigeons?
They fly away.
In all directions, madly trying to get away from the paradigm shift they've been ignoring, which is going to blow up their paradigm.
Well, this is definitely, I feel, the beginning of a paradigm shift, without a doubt.
Okay.
And it focuses the Western willpower away from will to meaning.
Okay.
And that's, I think, the answer to Hiroshima.
Well, you better connect some dots there then. Go ahead.
Okay. See if I can do that. The normal idea that Jung felt was the problem of our time is the idea where there's a will, there's a way.
Kind of like Crowley on steroids?
Yeah. And what he wanted to see is there a way to live that we discover the way first and then the will follow.
Like going with the flow.
Going with something. And that relativizes the power drive of the Western mind and particularly of technology.
Well, remember, back in the 1950s, all of NASA and what would become NASA and all the other space agencies was the conquest of space.
Yeah. See, that's power.
Yeah,
that's
it wasn't that's what the appeal of Donald. Oh, let's not get into Donald Trump. I'm going to have you psychoanalyzing Donald Trump before the evening is over. And we don't want to go and do that, do we? No. But, power, in other words, so Jung was looking at this through the other end of the telescope and saying, wait a minute, maybe we don't control the river. Maybe the river controls us, or it's a mutual thing.
Exactly. I think the last thing you said, it's a mutual thing. And until we can recognize there is a greater rhythm that we need to understand and serve, we will continue to push our will on nature, on foreign peoples, on whatever. And that is the underlying source of the dangerous aspect that the Western mind has created.
Well, that's not just a challenge. That's an outright refutation of the Western scientific paradigm's entire directive.
Yep. That's why he went to the East and why I felt my experience in the East was so important.
So how far did he get before he died?
He really he spent most of his life working on the problems that emerge in the process of therapy. He was a psychiatrist, and that was his passion. Not so much the bigger questions. I'd say in the last 5 or 10 years of his life, his horizon shifted because he felt, well, I've done pretty much what I needed to do, helping, young psychologists train and learn their craft. And so his last years, I think, really just put that question that I put to you and tried to stress its importance. What's the nature of the psyche, that it can affect matter, and what's the nature of matter, that it can receive the psyche? And Pauli was saying physics has got to go in this direction, and Jung was saying psychology has to go in this direction as well.
Well, it seems to me that that would be part of a natural evolution. In other words, you acquire data. He acquired lots of data in his therapy and his clinical work and all that. And then when you get a kind of a critical mass, you can start to look at patterns and flows and directions and see if there is a big picture.
Well, here's the problem. Data.
Okay.
I'll give you an example. I was talking to a medical doctor and describing work I had done with a client who, through dream work, was able to overcome diabetes. That lasted, he cured his diabetes through dream work. That lasted, he didn't need insulin anymore, and that lasted for about 2 or 3 years. Now, it eventually returned. But I could show how, in that instance, dream work can affect physiology. And I told that to the doctor. And I said, and that's a fact. He said, no, it's not. It's an anecdote. All we can come up with in the individual work, because people are so individually different, are anecdotes. The ability to come up with repetitive data is almost impossible. That's the problem.
Well, that then goes right in the heart of, flies in the face of, Arthur Eddington's famous dictum in the Victorian era. Remember, he said, "Gentlemen, you do not have a science unless you can express it in numbers." Right. So how do you take psychiatry, psychology? I mean, there's a lot of papers I've seen that kind of pretend to do this, but really, if the individual client in a therapy situation is so all over the map, how can you create any statistics that have any meaning to predict? And science has to have some basis to predict. Otherwise, it's just anecdotes.
Yeah, I don't think you can.
So did that tell Jung there was a fundamental problem in epistemology and the actual approach? Yes. Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what he came to, was science needs to reevaluate its epistemological foundations. Now, I know that's a big statement, but here's
why don't we break that down for people that have never seen an epistemology?
The scientific method is itself problematic because it only recognizes what's real as what is repeatable. But individuals are individual singular instances, and so the scientific method runs into a wall. Now, a certain narrow-minded scientist will say, well, that just shows you that psychology isn't scientific. Mm-hmm. And a person in my position would say, no, that shows us that our highest methodology is incapable of grasping the biggest problems we face, which is, namely, what are people made of and how can we live in a sane society?
It's kind of like trying to do brain surgery with a pipe wrench.
Yes.
Well, you have the wrong tool.
Yeah.
Science as it exists, Jung was saying, has the wrong set of tools for this particular scientific problem.
Now, where I think, this is how I try to frame it. I think we're dealing here with an issue that will remain open for a few hundred years.
You think it's going to take that long, huh?
Oh, yeah. Imagine trying to describe to a medieval alchemist what the Pauli exclusion principle is. See, the mental apparatus simply wasn't there. I wonder if the mental apparatus we need simply isn't there to address these questions. And in time, it will surface.
Or resurface.
Resurface.
Are you at all familiar with these two really polar opposite views of history? The Victorian, ever improving, ever getting better, ever evolving, yes. And then the cyclic model, maybe we could say it's Mayan, whatever, where history repeats itself.
That's a very big question. Interestingly, the next thing I want to work on is the role of dreams in history.
Oh. Like have you heard of things like Yuga cycles?
Well, I've been working with the historian Arnold Toynbee.
Oh, okay.
Who tries to see cycles throughout history as repetitive.
How many thousand volumes in his encyclopedia of, I forget.
12.
12. Oh, my God. Yeah. Talk about breaking your back trying to lift them all at once.
Well, that's another interesting story. Can I take a little?
Yeah, by all means, take it aside and tell us.
Your question is very dear to me, and it is something I want to work on. And I've already given a seminar, extensive seminar on it. And I had bought his magnum opus, which is I think it's 12 or 14 volumes, in paperback, and they were falling apart. And I thought, if I'm going to write on this, I have to have a good set. So I looked on the internet. And they were $2,000, $3,000, $4,000.
Leather bound, gold, and all the usual.
I can't afford that. And then I saw one for sale for $350.
Oh.
And I looked at the phone number, and I said, that's an Indianapolis phone number. So I called the guy up.
And wait. You're in Indianapolis, right?
Yeah, I'm in Indianapolis. So it was a local phone number for the books for sale for $350.
A big story there.
So I called the guy up and I said, is this like an international number I'm dialing wrong, or are you really the bookshop selling these books? He said, oh yeah, I've got them for sale. And I said, well, where are you located? He was located 2 blocks from me. So I went over there to buy the books. I walk in and he says to me, are you really going to read these things? I said, yeah, I'm going to read them. He says, for you, $250.
Holy cow. This is a mega synchronicity.
I think so, yeah. But to get back to your question, I don't have an easy answer, but certainly.
So wait, let's stop there. What do you think guided you to get those books at a critical time in your life? They're right next door. They're incredibly reasonable. The universe is obviously saying, they're yours, they're yours. What is impelling this pattern, this guiding you to where you had to be for what you had to have?
Well, first of all, it came from a dream.
Oh, that's a part you didn't tell us.
That came from a dream. But, I think the subtext of your question is very important. See, I really think people are born into life with a plan.
Okay, I know that's one of the models.
Yeah,
we have this big conference in the sky, and we all get these numbers and these, hidden thingies, and they zap our memory, and we come down not knowing a damn thing, and we're supposed to try to figure it out. That seems very inefficient.
Oh, it's very inefficient, yes. Yes. Yeah, I mean, we're not getting a free lunch here.
We're not even getting, the map on the car and the sunglasses.
Or not even an hors d'oeuvre.
No.
It's a lot of work.
Okay, and
I would like to try to understand how individuals' struggles and the needs of a historical moment fit into a bigger plan. I'm pretty sure that exists.
Okay. So what kind of research directions are you thinking of? In other words, if you're going to take a crack at this, where would you look for the weak point where things might fall into place and we have a pattern that means something?
Well, this is what we're doing in our individual work, is trying to see what a person's story is and where it got stopped. Now, a lot of people, when they figure that out, they're happy campers. They say, bye-bye, thank you very much, see you later. Some folks, for reasons I don't really understand, will say, you know what? Where does all this fit in the bigger picture? And then, using the same method of dream work, we try to understand not only what the story of the individual is, but what the story of the historical moment is and how those two intersect.
So you got 2 guys. You got one who trips over his shoelaces, realizes he had to tie the shoelaces, moves on. And another guy trips over his shoelaces and says, why am I wearing shoelaces?
Yeah, exactly. And where's the big shoelace in the sky?
Okay, let's leap here. What was Jung doing with Goethe and Faust?
Oh, just what I was mentioning earlier. I'll give you a quick thumbnail of Goethe's Faust.
Mm-hmm.
Faust was a bored academic who sees this pretty young thing and he wants to seduce her. And the devil appears and the devil says to Faust, "Listen, I'll help you get her if you get so happy that you say to life, stay, thou art so fair. If you ever get so happy with her, your soul is mine. Well, the story is a disaster. He ends up killing the girl's brother, and then the girl ends up committing suicide. That's part one. Part two, he tries again. And throughout the whole series of books, the whole second volume of Faust, written 20 years later, he messes up everything he tries. At the very end, he says, I got to do something right. So it's incredibly modern. He says, I'm going to build some condos. And he acquires a tract of land that's a marsh. He drains the marsh to build this housing project. And in the process, he kills an old couple who are living there. Now, that old couple are Philemon and Baucis. That's an allusion to Greek myth. Mm-hmm. You with me so far?
Yep.
Philemon and Baucis in Greek myth were an old couple living in the forest. And the gods, I think it was Zeus and Hermes, were out walking in the forest. It got late, and they needed a place to sleep. They knocked on the door, and this old couple, being good Greeks and hospitable, invited them in for a night's stay. In the morning, they were pleased at the old couple's hospitality and offered them anything they wanted. Their wish was to spend eternity together. So when they died, they became two entwined trees that lived on together as a couple. That's the end of the story. Well, Philemon and Baucis are what Faust kills. And Jung thought Faust represented what we were talking about earlier, the Western technological, scientific power drive that destroys the place where the gods enter in. And what he was trying to do was find a way we can be effective, but not destroy that spot where a higher consciousness can enter. And that's what I was saying earlier, trying to see, can we live from the way and not from the will?
And your answer is?
Well, it's an individual, I think at the moment it's an individual journey to find out where your meaning is, and then to surrender your own arrogance to fulfilling that meaning, and out of that comes a different kind of effectiveness. It's not pushy. It's not power-driven. It doesn't dominate. It shares and wants to know.
Is part of the reason why there's this overdose of heroin and all kinds of other drugs in major parts of the culture where you wouldn't expect it, because people don't really understand that they're dying because of lack of meaning in this culture?
Absolutely. I just saw a dream recently. You don't have to be a dream interpreter to figure this out. A young guy who was in the process of making some value decisions about the way he was living his life dreamt that the 20th century was a huge machine on rollers barreling across the United States, devouring anything in its path. So that I think it's the mechanization of life that's killing the soul, and the addict is starved to find that soul. The only way they know is through an injection.
Well, enlarging the metaphor, I'm looking at this culture right now, this electoral process that we're watching like a reality show, and it is a reality show, and it seems to me, given that all the participants seem to be irrelevant in terms of education, background, whatever, these are all people who are looking at the system, not just the political system, but the system with a capital S as a whole, and they're saying it's not working. It's simply not working. Give us anything but what's been going on. Anything. In other words, I think we're going through a cultural catharsis that requires the genius of a Jung to figure out and to give us a roadmap for how to get out of here safely, because we're in some very dangerous places tonight in terms of this unstoppable need on the part of people, lots of people, millions of people, to make it stop, to make the pain go away, to make it begin to work again. And they're willing to look in the most extraordinary places because everything they've trusted and believed in now is not working.
I couldn't agree more.
So where do we go? How can Jungian psychology help in this? I mean, we're going through a catharsis, a cultural catharsis, right on, international global television.
Well, I think we're working with individuals one at a time, and I would like to see if we can expand that. But just to go with what we know, to answer your question directly, I think the first thing you've got to realize is it isn't working. And how many people are trying to get a better seat on the Titanic as it sinks? And the first thing is to stop accepting the values that are rammed down our throat. Competition, conspicuous consumption, your place on the pecking order, the power. If I'm more powerful, I'm better than you are. And that whole thing is, you've got to become aware of that.
Does this mean I don't have to watch the Kardashians anymore?
You are free to.
No, I'm free. I'm free. Okay, thank you.
You might even have to start watching children's cartoons. Who knows?
Hey, there's a lot of truth hidden Saturday morning.
There's a lot of truth in that stuff. You're not kidding.
Amazing.
And then what we try to do is fashion an attitude towards life that is not seducible by those pressures. Knowing then what is genuine for me and making the sacrifice often to eschew the public applause and chart your own individual destiny.
Well, there's definitely a yearning, this huge gaping yearning that's not being filled. And I don't know whether we can get from here to there and fill it peacefully, or we have to have, the term revolution is kind of being tossed around all over. Movement, revolution. And Bernie Sanders is trying to keep it political revolution, so he contains it. But obviously, these representations are archetypal, and the culture is so polarized and so desperately searching for something that labels and left-right mean nothing anymore. And to me, just as an amateur looking at this, it's tailor-made for a higher-level analysis to decide what it's trying to tell us and how we can help it go where it needs to go to have resolution.
Yes. Now I would go back to Jung's idea of archetypes. His view is that history is shaped by large impersonal forces that seize us and gobble us up and move us in a particular direction. And I'll be 68 coming up. What I hope I can do in some of the last years I've got is try to understand from the dreams the portrait of what is driving us off point.
Okay. Well, what seems to be driving an awful lot of people is meaninglessness. They're not. How many iPads can you buy? How many iPhones can you talk on simultaneously? How many things can you acquire? It really is almost at the core very, very simple. We have a culture totally devoted to the economics of consumerism, and and we have a stunning set of realities around us in the solar system, as I laid out at the top of the show, that are out there now, and they're being blithely and totally ignored, and they will have so much more import in terms of where history goes than the soap operas we're currently fascinated and almost obsessed by.
Yes, of course.
Yet
definitely.
They're being totally ignored by every level of the culture. They're being ignored, like what they're trying to say is so big, so huge, so enormously important that we can't culturally even deal with it.
Yeah, I'm with you totally on that. What I think we could offer, somebody in my discipline, is a portrait of what is causing that.
Okay.
I don't know what it is, but that's what I hope to work on.
So methodologically, I can do that this time of night, yes. How do you begin? How do you begin to expand from the individual, who you are obviously dealing with in great numbers, to the culture as a whole? Because we're in a sick culture. We're in a sick culture with nuclear weapons. Those things do not mix well.
Looking for patterns in the dreams, that's where I would start.
Okay.
I don't know what they are, but that's what I want to try to do.
Well, for most people, they're nightmares. There's this, Trump is appealing to people's worst fears of the other, fears of being destitute, fear of not having anybody to depend on. The government can't depend on them, can't depend on individual politicians. Everybody's lying. In other words, he's creating rootless people that only will depend on him.
Yeah, exactly.
And that psychology mirrors another set of ages.
Very scary. Very scary.
And your prescription? I mean, we have all these other tools now. We have social media. We can deal with people. We've been trying some what we call mass consciousness experiments here, which is the ultimate mind over matter. When Jimmy Carter's cancer was presented to us as a fait accompli, based on the work of Art Bell and George Norrie, some other folks, and personal things that were done with me, I said, why don't we just kind of hold him in our thoughts and envision him being whole and well? And lo and behold, a few weeks later, the doctors are announcing that his cancer's gone and they've discontinued treatment. Now, did we cause it? There's no possible way we can know.
Oh, I wouldn't be so sure.
But if you lay it out there in the context, as I've said on the show again and again, of physics which is changing so that good things are amplified enormously. The good are getting better. And by the same token, the bad things are being amplified. The bad are getting worse, and they're doing it shamelessly in public, and we're aghast that these things have never happened before. But it's because this physics, this reality, this underlying set of physical principles that Pauli and Jung tried to figure out way back then, I think that's what we still need to figure out, because it isn't way back then. It's mandating where we're all going from here on.
Yes, I agree.
And on that note,
I'll let you know when the next book comes out. It's things I want to work on. And I don't want to sound naive. I don't know if I can solve anything, but I would certainly like to take some shots at what is it that's driving us. If we understand what's driving us, can we turn it around? Is what's driving us really meant to be something helpful, but because we misunderstand it, it's turned poisonous? These are all questions for me.
They're all excellent questions for all of us. Here on the other side of midnight, my guest this morning is Gary Sparks. We shall return. And we are back on the other side of midnight, about a half an hour remaining in this morning's episode. Interesting episode. Oh my gosh, such connections. Okay, if you want to call in and talk to Gary, by all means do so. You know our numbers. The Skype number is 505-796-8802, or you can reach us at Enterprise Mission or Other Side of Midnight. Those are both Skype handles. In the meantime, I want to go back to the individual. Okay, we are kind of informed, I guess, by all these studies that regardless of the uniqueness of individuals, somehow individuals get interesting information in ways that don't make sense to a Newtonian, even relativistic perspective. And that information from time to time tries to ping us to pay attention to the things that could be, if we paid attention, important in our lives. So it seems to me we need to focus on our dreams, which is where our defenses are down, most of us, and we are getting information if we can figure out that it's meaningful information. How do we know we're having a meaningful dream? How do we know we're having a synchronistic moment that's going to be really important if we pay attention? And how do we know when it happens so we can say, okay, I know what I should do now. I should go there.
Well, I would say all dreams are meaningful.
Ah, okay. So we tossed out the speck of mutton theory in the Christmas Carol.
Okay. I'm afraid so. Now, Maybe some are more meaningful than others. And one of the ways I think you can tell if it's a really important dream is it'll be upsetting.
Oh.
You'll have a very strong emotional reaction to it.
Oh, I wonder, maybe this is the time to tell my weird dream.
Sure, go ahead.
I had the most bizarre dream, and if I hadn't had the dream and I hadn't conquered the dream, I would not be sitting here tonight talking to you. This may take maybe 3 or 4 minutes, so let me see how to abbreviate this so we don't lose the meaning. Back when I was looking at all this stuff at Cydonia, I did a few small little trial presentations, public presentations. One in Berkeley at the Society for the Study of Consciousness. Arthur Jung and his wife Ruth, the inventor of the Bell helicopter and all that.
Uh-huh.
And that was kind of an interesting focus group because there were several sets of people, including one who called me up afterwards and who thought I was a CIA plant doing a mind control experiment to find out if average people, would freak out when presented with evidence there was an ancient civilization on Mars. The face, the city, the pyramids, and all that. This is back in the early 80s, 1981, 82, 83, somewhere around there. So one of the next things, I get an invitation to come to a ranch outside of Salt Lake City on the border between Utah and Nevada, a 500,000-acre ranch, which is owned by a guru who is the follower of a guy named Swami Yogananda. I
know the name, sure.
In Santa Barbara.
Yeah.
So I show up. There's all kinds of impediments to me showing up. The crew is really enthusiastic. I said out of the blue, can you build me an outdoor movie screen so I can show this stuff, alien civilization under the stars on a ranch at sunset, in the middle of the Nevada desert? And they said, sure. So they did. And we had the most incredible driving thunderstorm that afternoon and evening, and we're all huddling inside in these like Quonset huts, and the hail is beating on the Quonset hut. It's like God says, oh, no, you're not going to show this stuff outside under my sky.
Right.
And this is after arriving in Salt Lake and falling 1,000 feet into the airport. Really, the airplane fell 1,000 feet. They lost my luggage. So I'm standing up in front of this crowd of total strangers in the middle of a wind-whipped desert at sunset on the border between Utah and Nevada, and I'm wearing borrowed jeans, borrowed T-shirt, borrowed everything, and nothing fits. So I do this incredible presentation, and the reason it's incredible is because the feedback was incredible. We must have stayed up until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning talking about the implications of an ancient culture, a civilization on Mars, and shown by NASA imagery, and who might have been there, who could have done it, how did it relate to this compound's philosophy, because they had a set of teachings from Yogananda that a group of an ancient race called the Builders had built a whole bunch of stuff, and this is part of this particular guru's public persona. That's what he kept talking about. So bringing me out there, they flew me out there on an airplane and all this, to show them data I thought was kind of interesting. And so we ended the evening on a very high note, lots of discussion about implications, not much about is it real. I mean, they accepted that the data was what the data looked like because their own people in the past had predicted stuff like this when we got technology to where we could go to other planets. So it's all ending on a high note. I am put to bed in a guest room of the ranch foreman. His 2 little girls are spending time with their grandma somewhere in, I think, Palo Alto. So they have their room, and I get up in one of the little trundle beds, and I'm falling asleep. It's been a wonderful day, very exciting, a lot of effort to get there, but ended on the right note. I fall asleep, and I wake up in a total, terrified, panic, most horrible situation I can imagine anyone ever being in. I am screaming at the top of my lungs, 140 dB, in a very small ranch house in a very large empty set of millions of acres of nothing. And I have never been so scared and terrified in my life because I had a dream, a vivid, incredibly palpable dream where I'm literally somehow suspended in space. I'm looking down at the world, and I'm told that I have to discontinue all this research. I have to cut it off with Sidonia. I can't follow any of the questions. I can't open any of the doors. I can't pursue this, because if I do, and this is not coming to me as a narrative, this is coming to me as kind of like one of those multifaceted experiences, like on Star Trek. Remember that episode with the Guardian of Forever, and you saw history flashing past at an accelerated rate? It was that kind of an impression. I'm looking at the world and I'm seeing continent after continent lighting up with the fierce nuclear fire of a thermonuclear exchange, the final war of Armageddon. Yeah. Missiles left, right, Russia, the United States. It's World War III. It's the end of everything. And through it all, there is this, it isn't even a voice, it's more like an accusation, a deep, fundamental accusation. You caused all this because you had to find out. I was being shown that I was responsible for the death of humanity live as I'm watching in a nuclear exchange from orbit, from space, with a perspective. And it was so terrifying, I'm screaming at the top of my lungs in a total stranger's house with people running down the hall and all kinds of, I can hear in the background. And at the same time, as I was so horribly afraid, unlike I have ever been before or since in my many, many decades of being on this mortal coil, I also had the simultaneous revelation. This is a huge blankety-blank lie. You are being lied to. You are being manipulated. You are being driven to fear by a lie. It's not real. It's manipulation. Someone is trying to get you to do something you should not do.
You lost me there. Meaning that the fear of the catastrophe was just a drama cooked up to scare you.
I knew it was a fake, but it was so real. The reality was terrifying, but the fakery was even more terrifying because it made me angry.
Yeah.
And the anger, it sounds almost like a cliche from some movie, but it was the anger that snapped me out of it. And allowed me to wake up. And, of course, for the next 2 days, because I drove back to the Bay Area with these two people that had come from the Bay Area to this conference, on that whole trip driving back, we talked about nothing but why did this happen in a so-called protected sacred space where I was supposed to be under the protection of light and bubbles and all of this. Who got in there, and why were they so determined to basically get me to go and do anything but what I'm doing right now?
Right. Well, I've got a book for you to read.
Okay.
I'll try to give you my reactions, but there's a book that does a much better job. It's called Archetype of the Apocalypse.
That fits.
And by Edward Edinger, Edinger. He's now deceased. It's a study of dreams of nuclear holocaust.
Well, I'm old enough that I lived through duck and cover and all that. But see, what was so interesting to me is it was the non sequitur. Nothing about the evening had any presage of this.
Oh, yes, it did. You just didn't see it.
Like?
Well, here's how he interprets these kinds of dreams. And that's been actually a very frequent dream in my own dreams. Just that kind of thing you've told about. You are about ushering in a new view of life.
Yeah, we've been kind of conscious that if this is real, that's what it means, nothing more, nothing less from the get-go. But I never associated, because we actually started third-track diplomacy with the Russians, with me at the National Academy of Sciences meeting with Segdeov to try to head off exactly what I was shown would happen if we were successful. So it was very specific and directed at the things that I was concerned about, not that night, but on a meta scale over a longer period of time.
But see, these themes of nuclear destruction are a metaphor for the death of an old world.
Well, that's true. That's definitely true.
That's what you were being shown.
Okay. We have so many people circling around. Michael, let's add you to the conversation. Welcome to the other side of midnight. Michael?
Hi, how are you?
You're on the air.
I got a comment about dreams and how they manifest themselves. sometimes you might even have a dream and the next day, or you have a deja vu, and then you realize that you had dreamed that. So is this synchronicity, or is this something else?
Oh, that's
Gary?
synchronicity. That's synchronicity.
Yeah.
Deja vu is just another word for synchronicity. Now you have to ask yourself, what's it mean?
Yeah. I had one the other day where I was, someone said, and where I'm working, if I come up with ideas and I put it in the computer and if the idea is used, I get $10. And my supervisor told me that. I said back to her, I said, well, that's $10 in my pocket. And that was just boom. All of a sudden, that's what I remember dreaming that. I was saying that to her. $10 in my pocket.
You dreamt that, and then did it happen in reality somehow?
Yeah, it happened the next day, right after, yeah.
And what was the idea?
She was telling me if I had some good ideas to put them in the computer, and if they use them at work, I would get $10.
Oh, so it was the very idea of a suggestion that was picked up and used.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I said, yeah.
All right,
and I
Michael,
did have a suggestion.
tonight we're going to kind of, destroy the pattern because we have so many people. I'd love to talk more, but I'd like to get some other folks in because that's a very, very positive ping there. You dreamed it, and it happened.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on. Let's add you to the conversation. Who are you and where are you calling from?
Hello, I'm Craig, and
Hi,
I'm
Craig.
calling from Tacoma, Washington.
Tacoma, Washington?
Yes.
Okay, what's on your mind?
I was curious, really great show, by the way.
Thank you.
I was curious what insights the psychologist could give about people experiencing death within dreams.
Gary's a team. Gary, it's a big one. Meaning and death in dreams.
It's a very big one. I will answer it shortly. But I can point you to a book if you're interested. It's called Death and Dreams by Marie-Louise von Franz. That's the video that we watched earlier. Generally, it has to do with dying to a current attitude. Dreams of death do not generally mean you're going to die, but that something in you needs to come to a halt. If you're going to die, you generally dream other themes. So it's a metaphor for something that has reached its terminal point, and it's time to let it go and move on.
Okay. That makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we got some lines open here. I wanted to go back to a question I had before, which was Gnosticism. Did we ever really ring out the connection why Jung was so interested in Gnosticism?
Yeah, we have not. I don't know if it will take us past our time limit. Let's just say
we can just keep going. Kidding, just kidding. So,
give you the short answer. There's a long answer, but to give you a short answer, when he split from Freud, he went through a period of confusion and turned back to early religious texts to see if he could find some parallel between his experience and the mythological systems of these early times. That's a very simple answer.
Okay. And how did he come out on that?
Well, it led to his research on alchemy.
Oh, that's intriguing.
But remember, the Gnostics thought that a piece of God got trapped in the world. The Gnostics the alchemists picked up on that, and they thought their alchemical procedure was to release that piece of God in matter. And when they did so in their, alchemical laboratories, they would have turned that material into gold.
Interesting.
And Jung took that as a metaphor for releasing one's meaning from being submerged in materialism.
Well, the idea of physics being intersected with consciousness and you using one to free the other, I mean, that's right up our alley. Okay, we have another caller.
That's the later evolution of that idea.
The logical imperative of where he was going. Caller, you're on the air.
Hi, this is Don, DKJ.
Hi there.
I had a daydream, the most vivid daydream I've ever had in my life, 3 days before 9/11. And I thought I was dreaming about an avalanche because it was this dirty snow with dips and things in it. And I had the ability to fly up above and look down the vortex of all this stuff falling. And it was amazing. And I was
wait. Hang on. You were having an out-of-body. You're flying above the vortex of what?
In the dream. Dream.
But you're...
And it was a daydream. I was like sitting there watching television. I had this little mini daydream.
But I'm trying to figure out what you're dreaming. Are you seeing 9/11?
I saw the building collapse.
And you say you went above it. You went above it to look down the vortex.
Yeah, I was watching this snow. I thought it was an avalanche falling.
Wow.
And snow and this papers and dirt and stuff that was in this smoke.
Because see, right there, no one knows there was a vortex when those buildings collapsed. If you looked at it from the top down, you would have seen like a tornado swirling around like a vortex. That's how the physics that brought those buildings down works, Gary. And it's the same physics you can measure in the vicinity of a pyramid that ticks off an accutron watch if the person thinks about it in the right way.
Huh.
So this is a unified field, and we can flow back and forth in manipulating it, or it manipulates us, or it directs us like the currents of a river. That's one hell of a dream.
Yes.
Yeah. And then when I saw it on television, it really scared me. The first thing I thought of when I saw it on TV was remote-controlled aircraft.
Okay.
Because I had worked at McDonnell Douglas, and the MD-11 had the ability to be fly-by-wire by satellite. At least that's one of the engineers told me that.
Mm-hmm.
So if they got hijacked, they could take control of it and land it. So the first thing that came to mind was GPS remote control.
Except, the planes didn't bring the buildings down. They were merely the visible indicator of the event. Other physics brought those buildings down.
Yeah, but I mean, just the flying into the building.
It was the beginning of the show. It was what everybody saw that began the show. So I have many other people. So thanks for the dream. Vivid, Keep in touch.
It was pretty cool. All right. Bye.
All right. Night. Okay, let's try to get this one in. Good morning. You're on the other side of midnight.
Hi there. This entire show, I've listened to this show already.
Oh, that's cute.
Yes. So that's what, Synchronicity, right?
I think that qualifies.
Yeah, and a little freaky.
Yeah.
Hey, we've caused we're in the Twilight Zone so deep, Gary, you have no idea. No idea.
Be careful what you talk about.
I'm sorry?
He's kidding. He's kidding. So continue, please.
Yeah, little bits and pieces that have caught my attention that I found very interesting about the show today. I've heard it already. And I remember being interested in those specific points before. Only I didn't call in the previous time, or in the. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah.
Well, do you know how the show ends?
I do not, because me calling in was not part of. Before.
So you've broken the timeline, Gary. What would you advise here?
I've never heard of anything like this, so I'm not sure what to say. I hope it was interesting.
I do too.
It has been twice.
Well, thank you. Okay, we got some open space. Another couple of minutes. Let's see. There was something I wanted to ask before we have to disappear into the night again. In 1945, when the bomb was dropped in Nagasaki and Hiroshima,
Yeah.
A few months later, we had the Nag Hammadi scriptures, the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's a synchronicity, but what's the connection? What's the meaning?
Absolutely. The key, first of all, they're Gnostic scriptures.
Okay.
Which means they're about that piece of God that is trapped in matter. And that's the same theme that was in Pauli's dreams. And that apparently is what we need to come to grips with to get past Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Or the energies and the physics displayed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki are part of how we can untrap God from matter.
Yes. Now, I can tell you a personal story. When I was in the Peace Corps, my boss, where I was teaching, was at Hiroshima when the bombs went off.
Oh, my God.
It's a story very dear to me. He said he was driving, I don't remember whether he said 10 miles or 10 kilometers away from the city. And next thing he knew, a big wave blew him out of his Jeep, and he landed face down and was unconscious for a short time, and he woke up. That probably saved him from getting blinded. And he was the first wave back into Hiroshima dealing with the destruction.
Was he there as a missionary or what?
No, he was Korean, but see, the Koreans were conscripted into the Japanese army.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he told me that, and he sobbed like a baby. And his final words on that afternoon were, "There must be no more Hiroshimas. For God's sakes, promise me there will be no more Hiroshimas."
Obviously imprinted in his soul.
And on mine, too, after that afternoon.
Darren, welcome to the other side of midnight.
Hello, good evening. Hi, Gary.
Hello.
Have you ever had intense dreams about loved ones that have passed away?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, because those are ones that I never forget. I'll have like one after like I lose a relative or a family member. And it's almost like a visitation. I mean, I wake up after it, or sometimes during it, and I'll never forget them. Every time I've had one, I've had like 4 different ones now, including when my wife's father passed away. The night he passed away, I had a vivid dream. And those are very interesting.
I think it's very possible that they are the spirit of the deceased returning.
I think so, too, because they're different than every other dream I've ever had.
Yeah. Exactly. We have time. I'll tell you a quick story.
We got about 2 minutes.
Told me by one of my teachers, by Von Franz, actually. She was seeing a student analyst who was seeing a woman whose husband or fiance was killed in an air crash.
Yeah.
And the student analyst brought to my teacher 12 dreams. And my teacher interpreted I think 9 of those dreams psychologically, but she said, but these 3 dreams are of the man's returning spirit. And the student said, oh, that's bullshit, and got up and left, and without telling Von Franz, went behind her back and got an hour with Jung. And Jung looked at the dreams, and he said, well, these 9 dreams have a psychological meaning, except these 3 dreams, and he pointed to the exact same dreams. These 3 dreams are the man's spirit returning to the girl. Those dreams feel differently.
Yes, definitely. Richard, have you ever had one of those?
Yes, but we don't have time for me to go into it. So for another show, and we have Gary back.
All right.
Thanks
guys.
Gary, a couple minutes remaining, actually less. Your website is jgssparks.net.
Yes.
Jung and Pauli.
I got 2 websites, yeah. jgsparks.net and jungandpauli.net.
Okay. And then, if I can get down to the bottom of this thing here, we have these amazing books, The Heart of the Matter, Synchronicity and Jung's Spiritual Testament, and Valley of Diamonds, Adventures in Number and Time, with Maria Louise von Franz.
They're an attempt to communicate what we've been talking about to the layperson.
Well, that means me. So, yeah, if you can recommend anything for some of the things we've discussed, and obviously when we have more time, we will have you back and we'll discuss other things. I really want to kind of look at this cultural shift we're going through now, the electoral process itself, from a Jungian perspective.
Yeah.
So that might be an interesting future show.
Sure. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Gary. My guest this morning has been Gary Sparks. We've been talking about Jung, synchronicities, things that go bump in the night, this time of night, that actually, when you look at the carpet, there's something making the bump there, and we need to try to figure it out. Well, okay, until the same time tomorrow morning, same channel, same location, same resonance in the ether. You've been on the other side of midnight. Tomorrow morning we have surprises. So until then, remember, third star on the left, straight on till morning. Good night, everyone.